Before our speakers begin, I'd like to note a few logistics. All attendees are currently in listen-only mode. Following our speakers' remarks, we will open the webinar to questions. Throughout the presentations, please type your question into the chat box, which we will try to address during the Q&A period. We will prioritize questions from members of the media, so if you are press, please include your name and outlet in the chat box. Finally, this webinar is being recorded and we will send a link to registrants after the webinar. Today's webinar looks at energy efficiency's vital role in mitigating climate change. ACEEE's new report finds that robust efficiency measures can slash emissions enough to get the United States halfway towards its climate goals, hence the report's title, Halfway There. To explore the topic, we have 4 speakers joining us today. Stephen Nadell, Executive Director of ACEEE, Kathleen Gaffney, Senior Program Manager of the Energy Efficiency Division at the International Energy Agency, and Vignesh Gaurishankar, Associate Director of the Climate and Clean Energy Program at NRDC, the Natural Resource Defense Council. And finally, Clay Nestler, Vice President of Global Sustainability and Regulatory Affairs at Johnson's Controls. First, we'll hear from Stephen Nadell, co-author of ACEEE's new report. He will highlight the report's key findings.
Okay, thank you, Wendy, and welcome everyone to our webinar about our new report. I co-authored this report along with Lowell Unger on our staff, and I'll be presenting briefly the results and then look forward to your questions. So ACEEE is a nonprofit research organization. We will be celebrating our 40th anniversary next year. And on this slide, some additional information about ACEEE for those who don't know us. I'm not going to be reading all the slides here. So as you see the slides, you should look at what you're interested in. We will be posting them, but I'll just be hitting some high points. So for this study, we used the Energy Information Administration's 2019 Annual Energy Outlook as the foundation. Their reference case was the base case for our study. However, we did adjust their baseline to assume more generation from renewables and less from coal, based on projections from Bloomberg and many others. Most people think the EIA estimates were a little out of line on this, and we wanted to have a fair baseline as opposed to one that would effectively exaggerate the impacts of the energy efficiency policies. We modeled 11 different energy efficiency measures, which we called our opportunity analysis, and 11 different efficiency policies. In general, we look for measures and policies that would save substantial energy, were technically feasible, and were very likely to be cost effective, either currently or soon will be. This chart shows all the different measures we included. On the left is the opportunity analysis. On the right is the matching policy or policies. I won't be reading all of these. Again, these will be posted. But for example, we looked at appliance and equipment efficiency. The matching policies are appliance efficiency standards and Energy Star. We looked at zero energy buildings and homes, and building codes as a matching policy, etc. So that's how we did our analysis. This is the result of our opportunity analysis. As you can see in the base case, U.S. energy use is projected to remain approximately flat at about 100 quadrillion BTUs of energy use annually, sometimes called quads. We then looked at the savings from different packages of measures. This chart simplifies the 11 different opportunities and divides them into 7 categories. As you can see, except for the electric distribution savings, which are pretty small, most of them are pretty substantial. In total, we found in 2050, 49% savings from all of these opportunities relative to the base case for 2050. Hence our title, Halfway There. We also looked extensively at emissions reductions. Again, in the base case, they do slowly decline, but with our efficiency case, much more rapidly. In this case, we get a 57% reduction in carbon dioxide emissions, But then when we add in other greenhouse gases, such as methane or nitrous oxides, it works out to be 49% reduction in all greenhouse gases. Again, halfway there. This chart shows the savings by sector. As you can see from an energy saving point of view, transportation's the biggest, followed by industrial, with residential, commercial just behind. Although if you look at total building sector, residential, commercial, that is the largest. From greenhouse gas emissions, the transportation sector is a larger contribution because so much of the savings displace fossil fuels, gasoline and diesel, that have higher carbon emissions than the average emissions in the other sectors. Hence, transportation is nearly half the greenhouse gas emissions, with proportionally smaller but still very substantial reductions in the other sectors. So a little bit more about what these top opportunities are, starting from the biggest savings to, I'll call them medium-sized savings. Efficient and electric vehicles. In our scenario, we have a substantial shift to electric vehicles and trucks by 2050, ultimately 80% of light-duty vehicles, 45% of heavy-duty vehicles, continued fuel economy gains for those that continue to use internal combustion engines. Industrial efficiency and decarbonization was the next biggest category, including strategic energy management, smart manufacturing, new technologies, industrial processes, changes in feedstock to be lower carbon, and this includes electrification. Third was transportation system efficiency, meaning beyond the cars and vehicles themselves, but less driving in the cars and light trucks, improved freight system efficiency, as well as we bring in more efficient airplanes and operating practices. Fourth was upgrades to existing buildings and homes, whether upgrading the building or the home, plus also smart control strategies, as well as electrification of the remaining loads. Fifth, zero energy new buildings and homes, efficient design, as well as often electrification and use of renewable energy to meet average annual loads. We did not include that renewable energy in our energy efficiency and carbon savings. Those are above and beyond what we did analyze. And then the sixth big one is updated efficiency standards, as well as continued growth in the Energy Star program. Now, as I mentioned, we also did a policy analysis. This is more detail providing where the opportunity savings are. Again, vehicles are the biggest, followed by industry, etc. I will let people peruse this chart, which is posted at their leisure. Where a lot of attention lately has been placed on electrification. In our study, it was about 35% of the total greenhouse gas reductions, of which over 70%, just over 70% are in the transportation sector, with about equal segments in the industry and buildings. Now we get to the policy analysis, where we looked at all the 11 different policies. Again, this is energy savings, and we found that we could capture about 90% of the energy saving opportunities with these 11 policies. We'll need other policies and approaches for the remaining 10%. And from a greenhouse gas point of view, again, it's a little bit more savings there. Again, more for CO2 than all greenhouse gases, but they will get us nearly halfway there with these policies. I would note that the gap between the opportunity analysis and the policy is greatest for the transportation system improvements, as well as improvements to existing buildings. So those are areas that we all need to work on to improve our policy and implementation approaches. And for those who want lots of details on the policy analysis, here's the pie chart. Again, please enjoy it at your leisure. So what we're finding here is we can get roughly 50% energy and greenhouse gas reductions, but will require very substantial efforts beyond business as usual. We'll be needing rapid upgrades to vehicle standards, building codes, equipment efficiency standards, Energy Star specifications, as well as utility energy efficiency resource standard, utility targets. We'll also need substantial improvements to existing factories, homes, commercial buildings, and electric grid, as well as better management of these, all spurred by public investment and requirements. We'll need more mobility options and better management of freight and aviation use, including through some user fees. We'll be switching to electric vehicles, equipment, industrial process. And to get the greenhouse gas reductions, we'll need a more efficient and cleaner power sector. And finally, we'll need greater investment in research and development for new efficiency options in every sector. In particular, our industrial analysis assumes some continued improvements in industrial processes based on trends in recent years. So to conclude, we can slash greenhouse gas emissions, getting roughly halfway to our long-term energy and climate goals. But I'd also note that through these opportunities and policies, not only would we reduce energy use and greenhouse gas emissions, but there are any other benefits. Improved productivity, improved economy, improved personal comfort, air quality, public health, as well as many jobs. So with that, I will wrap up my presentation and turn it back to Wendy.
Thanks, Steve. That was a great highlight of how we can, with robust energy efficiency measures, get halfway towards our climate goals. Next, our next speaker is Kathleen Gaffney of the International Energy Agency. She co-authored IEA's Energy Efficiency 2018 report, which looked at this issue.
Yes, hello, this is Kathleen. I'm hoping you can hear me. Thank you, Wendy and Steve. As you mentioned, the IEA produces an annual publication called the Energy Efficiency Market Report, and the most recent one that we're working on now, and will be released in a few weeks, will profile results through 2018. But I'm going to just stick to some of the results that were available in last year's market report, which are produce very similar directional findings. So essentially, I have 3 key points to make. Energy efficiency is already delivering GHG emissions reductions globally. Energy efficiency has been a key factor contributing to the decoupling of energy use and emissions increases from global GDP growth. So without improvements in energy efficiency since 2000, we would have seen global energy use and emissions in 2017 at about 12% higher. So clearly energy efficiency has historically had an impact. However, the recent slowdown that we're recognizing in global energy efficiency improvements are concerning us. Basically, we're seeing primary energy intensity improvements in 2018 at about 1.3%, which is a slower rate of improvement than we've seen in the last few years, with 2017's improvement rate at 1.7, and the year before that, it was also not as great as it has been. So it's the 3rd consecutive year in a row that we're seeing this rate of improvement in primary intensity slowing. So in fact, 2018, the results that we're going to be producing in a few weeks show that it's even lower. It's the slowest rate since 2010. So this has had direct implications for GHG abatement because our modeling shows that primary energy intensity needs to improve by at least double this rate that it's at currently if it's going to reach climate change mitigation goals. But what we've also reported on in our last market report is the results of what we called our efficient world scenario modeling, or efficient world scenario, which is a modeling framework and strategy that showed that if the world took up all of the cost-effective energy efficiency opportunities available between now and 2040, not even accounting for technological change over time or the impact of renewables on the supply side, The efficient world scenario or the efficient world strategy shows us that energy-related emissions could peak by 2020 and then subsequently fall to levels that are 12% lower than today by 2040. So this would contribute, and this is the key fact, that key figure that the IEA publicizes about efficiency, but this would contribute over 40% of the abatement required to be in line with Paris agreements, and therefore we can safely conclude that efficiency is indispensable to achieving global climate targets, much like the report from ACEEE is saying for the US. And much like what Steve just mentioned, there are many other benefits that go along with reduced emissions, including reduction of air pollutants, which in our analysis last year shows that by 2040 they could fall by 1/3, which would see an avoidance of over 1 million premature deaths that are linked to indoor air pollution. And then just quickly to sum up, globally, I wanted to show sort of some sectoral trends. We don't really have the ability to analyze emissions reductions below the sectoral level, but we have some, we have some directional findings based on where we see the efficiency opportunities having the greatest impacts, and it would follow that as the world, as energy systems move to decarbonize and electrify, at the same time, there is some reason to believe these same emissions benefits could be achieved. So basically, with buildings being globally responsible for 40% of the CO2 emissions, efficiency can can bring about a lot of impacts in the building sector. So we said in our market report last year that efficiency can ensure energy demand from buildings would decline by 2040, despite total floor area growing by 60%. So again, global trends on the growth of building floor area are undeniable, and with efficiency we can reduce the impact both from an energy demand perspective but also emissions. I think it's worth mentioning that many of the global opportunities within buildings are similar to the opportunities in the United States. So heating and water heating, for example, through increased deployment of heat pumps, especially in areas with commensurate decarbonization priorities, and cooling. So with cooling, we're seeing the global energy demand expecting to triple by 2050, which is the equivalent of the total electricity consumption of China and India today. And then in terms of transport, with it being responsible for 24% of global emissions, we are projecting that efficiency could increase, could ensure that energy demand from transport would stay flat despite a doubling of activity levels, and bring about annual improvement levels, efficiency improvement levels of about 2.5% per year in most of the transport subsectors. So significant opportunities in the transport sector. We like to say that by 2040, the average passenger car could be as efficient as today's hybrids, with more than 40% of the global fleet being electric. And then finally, with industry, which is comprised about 24% of global emissions and currently constitutes about 38% of global energy use, efficiency can ensure that industry yields double its economic output for only a marginal increase in energy use, with manufacturing energy intensity improving by 44% by 2040. And it's interesting to know that 70% of the energy savings potential is coming from small and medium-sized industries, or the less energy-intensive manufacturing sectors. So things like doubling the rate of heat pump penetration in industry, or moving motors, the majority of motors to today's highest efficiency standard. That's the sort of 2040 picture we'd be looking at if we were able to achieve that amount of savings in this small, medium, less energy-intensive manufacturing industries. So I hope that's helpful. I'm happy to take questions, and thank you again for the opportunity.
Thanks, Kathleen. I do want to mention that our guest speakers do not have slides. And I realize that for some of you, perhaps some of Steve's slides got kind of stuck a little bit, but we will post those online so everyone does have them. Next, our next speaker will be NRDC's Vignesh Gary Shankar. He will provide a broader U.S. perspective. He co-authored a 2017 report on how to cut U.S. greenhouse gas emissions 80% by 2050, looking at energy efficiency and other clean energy sources.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Wendy, and AC Tripoli for inviting me to speak today. I'd like to first start by reinforcing that energy efficiency is an absolutely critical piece of the puzzle when it comes to solving climate change. In late 2017, NRDC released its report, America's Clean Energy Frontier, which mapped out our vision of how the US could slash emissions by mid-century and do its bit to solve the global climate crisis. We identified energy efficiency as central to that approach. And consistent with this ACEEE report, our 2017 report estimated more than half the emissions reductions coming from energy efficiency and electrification, which are the main areas covered by this report. Energy efficiency, which is to say using less energy to get the same or better services from heat or light, for example, is among the least expensive and the most successful ways of cutting emissions. There really is no better way to reduce emissions associated with energy than not needing some of that energy in the first place. Additionally, energy efficiency also makes it easier for other necessary clean energy solutions to perform at their best. For example, by reducing our power needs during peak hours, renewables can more readily supply the power needed. Or better building shells and insulation in homes and offices, for example, would render heat pumps that much more cost effective. So what's reassuring is that we know what the solutions are. And this report does a superb job of laying out the 11 most effective technology and policy solutions. Steve has already covered them, and Kathleen also provided some additional details just now, so I won't go further down that path, but I will stress that these solutions are tried and tested and have had demonstrated successes in some cases over decades. Energy efficiency is also great for the economy and society as well. Now, together, these opportunities could save the US hundreds of billions of dollars in 2050. Energy efficiency also, as previously mentioned, reduces harmful pollution and helps improve public health and enhance equity. With the right policies and market structures in place, these actions would build an incredible network of high-quality jobs and help Americans who are struggling to pay their energy bills. Already, the US has more than 2 million energy efficiency jobs, more than twice those in the fossil fuel industry. So with this unmatched ability to stimulate the economy and benefit all of us, no wonder it polls so well among voters from across the political spectrum. So it's really not a question of how we can or whether we should take action on energy efficiency. For the most part, that's crystal clear. Now, it's more about setting the goals, making the commitments, securing the resources, and doggedly sticking to the task at hand. We need a rapid and widespread expansion of our efforts on energy efficiency. Now, unsurprisingly, this needs to be an all-hands-on-deck affair. State governments and federal agencies need to set targets and standards. Companies must set corporate goals and dedicate internal resources to becoming energy smart. And I'm sure our next speaker, Clay, will touch on these areas. Regulators need to approve utility action and provide the right incentives and structures for other market players to participate. Service providers should develop products and solutions that meet customers and public needs. All this won't be easy, but this report makes things a good bit easier by helping us identify the available options and their pros and cons, by sizing their potential for reducing emissions and saving money, and by identifying the implementation challenges and likely policy and market solutions. In particular, the report covers important developments in recent years on how to extract energy savings using electric vehicles, from the industrial sector, and via smart buildings and technologies. And the policy analysis overlay I found especially valuable as it offers implementers an excellent framework for deciding what kinds of mechanisms to put in place based on the sector or the technology or the region in question. In other words, the report provides a basis to create a roadmap as needed. It's a terrific and welcome addition for anybody working in this space. So thanks to ACEEE for publishing this report.
Vignesh. Our final speaker today will be Johnson Controls' Clay Nestler. He's a corporate sustainability expert and a member of ACEEE's board of directors.
Okay, thank you, and good morning, everyone. Great pleasure to be here at the webinar, and congratulations to ACEEE on this report. I've read every word, and the timing couldn't be better with the Climate Action Summit next week in New York. I'm going to be speaking primarily from the perspective of head of sustainability for a Fortune 200 company, but following three very data-intensive reports, I wanted to share some of our own results from the 2018 Energy Efficiency Indicator Study. One of the questions we've asked for over a decade is, what policies can actually drive the greatest investment in energy efficiency and clean energy technologies? This survey goes to institutional, commercial, and industrial sustainability directors and energy directors, and the order of priority is exactly as detailed in the ACEEE study. Number one was building performance benchmarking and standards. Number two was government showing leadership through retrofitting of their own public buildings. Number three was building codes. Number four, equipment standards. Those would be in the top half of all the policies and measures that were included in the report. We also look for the key drivers for investment among those sectors. And as Vignesh noted, the most important thing is the private sector setting goals and targets. We found that those that have public goals around energy or carbon implement twice as many actions to improve energy efficiency compared to those with no public goals, and are 3 times more likely to increase investment in the next year. Now, the interesting thing about the private sector is we don't have to wait for government policy to act. 2,203 businesses are included in the We Are Still In coalition, which have pledged to meet the objectives of the Paris Agreement. 997 businesses are included in the We Mean Business. 997 makes one tempted to do an NPR annual funding drive kind of thing. 3 more companies by the end of the hour, and you don't have to sit through another webinar. But anyway, and 630 companies have committed to set science-based targets, which would involve very aggressive energy efficiency improvements, but also significant investment in renewable energy. Speaking on our own journey, Kathleen mentioned that the average energy intensity improvement is down to 1.3% per year, kind of economy-wide. We're very proud of the fact that since 2002, we've actually maintained a 4% energy intensity improvement. So since 2002, we've essentially doubled our energy productivity. We've done that primarily being driven through the Better Plants Challenge. That's a program of the U.S. Department of Energy, part of the Better Buildings, Better Plants Challenge. The technology and improvements we've implemented include ISO 50001 or Energy Hunt. We've implemented sub-metering and data analytics on our plants. In fact, given 300 plants, we've done studies, and those plants that implemented energy management processes and systems, as well as detailed data analytics and sub-metering, actually were multiple % greater improvement per year over the long term. We've also made process changes, which were mentioned earlier, switching some of our production from the use of fossil fuels to electricity, so electrification, a big trend there, as well as using more motors and less compressed air within the plants. The good news is that this was an investment and not a cost. We've saved the equivalent of $100 million per year after these improvements, so certainly has helped the bottom line. EP 100 is another commitment that organizations can join with the Climate Group and the Alliance to Save Energy for those wanting to make those public commitments. Second, and also second in, I am doing these in the order of the report actually, vehicles are a very large impact. We have 34,000 vehicles around the world in our fleet. We've made investments in electric vehicles where they make sense. They don't in Montana, by the way. start-stop battery drive systems, as well as hybrids, and telematics. Actually taking our service vehicles and putting them in the most efficient path. The old UPS, FedEx, no left turns kind of things save significant fuel economy. EV 100 is a program by the Climate Group putting in infrastructure by 2030 to support electric vehicles. Next on the ACEEE list was net zero or zero energy buildings, and I'm going to bundle in electrification. We've always had a policy of every new building and manufacturing facility to be LEED certified. We've imposed a self-imposed target of at least a 40% better energy efficiency than comparable code-based buildings. Our 3 headquarters in Europe, the US, and in Asia Pacific have converted to electric heat through heat pumps and the use of solar thermal for preheating, and essentially setting us up for achieving the balance through on-site renewables or the purchase of renewable energy credits. This is a trend that we see in our customer base as well. Maui College, my favorite project is an office building in Trondheim, Norway, where they're using heat pumps to provide heating that not only heats the building, which is an energy positive building, but also supports many of the buildings local to it in there. The World Green Building Council has a net zero buildings commitment in which property managers, companies, cities, and others can commit to achieving net zero energy by 2030 for new construction and for all existing buildings by 2050. Finally, I have to talk about retrofits and smart buildings because they're the next highest priority on the ACEEE report. If you read the report, which I highly recommend, they use the Empire State Building as a case study. 38% reduction in energy, a deep retrofit completed by a team. It's a perfect example of doing the right steps in the right order. Reducing the loads, putting in efficient equipment, putting in optimizing controls, and then topping off with renewable energy as necessary. In this particular case, 6,514 windows were remanufactured on a secret factory on the 5th floor of the building, making them super insulating, that with wall insulation, with high efficiency lighting and other things, reduce the cooling load for the building by over 1/3. That allowed a capital reduction such that the overall retrofit paid for itself in 3.1 years. With the building emissions law coming into effect and impacting 20% of multifamily and large and medium commercial buildings by 2024 and 75% in 2030, we're going to need to apply deep retrofits and all of the technologies and improvement measures we can find. One little piece of trivia about the Empire State Building is even though the windows retrofit is certainly the most famous improvement, over half of those energy savings came from what we would call smart building technology or intelligent efficiency, using ACEE's term. Direct digital controls, demand control ventilation, fault detection and diagnostic analytics, automated plug load control, daylighting, smart equipment, all of that combined to take the savings from what would traditionally be in the 20 or 15 to 20% range up to 38%. So I really believe that this report, as an incredible guidance for state, local, and federal governments around policy, is also a great roadmap for private sector and other organizations to use to address their climate change commitments in the near term through voluntary action. Thank you very much for the opportunity of being on the webinar.
Thanks, Clay. It's now time for the Q&A portion of the program. As a reminder, please type your question into the chat box. I do want to mention that a couple of the questions we had, one in particular asking, is the report for the US only? And it does have a US focus. A couple of the questions I'm going to direct at Steve right now. They have to do a little bit about the report itself. One person asked, are the opportunities cited in the report additional to existing EE programs and initiatives?
Yet they are additional to what is in the AEO reference case, and therefore it's additional to many of the current initiatives. AEO doesn't capture absolutely everything, so there's a little bit that's not additional, but most of it is additional.
Okay, and this is a question that I would in part direct to Kathleen if she's still on the phone. And it is, what is the reason behind the recent slowdown in energy efficiency gains, which is mentioned in the IEA report?
Okay, yeah, so that's a great question, and I don't have a precisely prepared response for you. I would say it's a large feature of our market report, which is coming out in a couple weeks, but, so you might have to stay tuned and wait for that. But I think there's some of the messaging already available on our website. We produce a global energy and CO2 status report early in the year, which sort of foreshadows some of the more detailed results that we can produce this time of the year. But essentially what we saw is a pretty exceptional year in terms of economic growth, in particular in the US, but also in other economies, large economies like China and even India. And what that did in terms of on the supply side and in terms of its influence on primary energy, sort of worsened the rate of improvement that we were seeing in energy intensity. Now, it's a very complex relationship between energy intensity and what we would otherwise refer to as energy efficiency. So this is the part I don't want to kind of get wrong on this recorded webinar. But I think, there were some changes in the supply side mix, changes in the structural conditions in the last, 12 to 16 months in certain economies like China. And there were also changes in weather. It's more maybe what we're calling more of the new normal, but some extreme weather in certain parts of the world, drawing more cooling, drawing more heating, and all that combined to basically slow once again the rate of improvement in energy intensity. And I think once you pick apart the role that energy efficiency, or say technical energy efficiency, when you talk about the improvements of efficiencies of air conditioners or heating systems, once you pick that out, you can actually see that we're still doing relatively good from a technical energy efficiency perspective, but that some of these other effects, like the structural changes and service level changes due to weather, they're sort of putting too much pressure or overshadowing, I should say, some of those technical efficiency improvements. So it could be that things might return back on course in a year's time from an energy intensity perspective, but we're still well below where we need to go to, which is part of the issue, and we need to keep pushing on efficiency and strengthening the existing policies to get back on that path.
I have a question that's directed towards Clay. You mentioned the impacts of EM 50001 and data metering, and one of the attendees wants to know, is there a report that documents those impacts?
There have been a number of studies and best practices reported in the Better Plants Challenge. So I'm aware of, I believe, a good report by Schneider Electric that did a detailed study of energy management systems implementation. This is a topic that was actually discussed at the most recent Better Buildings, Better Plants Summit here in Washington, D.C. a couple weeks ago. There does seem to be the supportive connection between setting goals, putting in a process for continuous improvement, reporting on that progress, and then using sub-metering at a process level and major energy consuming equipment to provide the insight to be able to go through the plan, do, check, act circle of continuously improving the goals and being able to track, report, and increase ambition over time. So I would recommend the DOE Better Plants Challenge site, both showcase projects, best practices. There have been award winners, best practices award winners for the last couple of years that have directly addressed this opportunity.
Okay. Thanks, Clay. We have a couple of questions relating to electrification. One question, and this is directed towards Steve regarding this report, and that's how do we account for the transition to a higher percentage of renewables, and how do we kind of look at the increasing efforts to improve the efficiency of industrial and large commercial gas?
Okay, so in our study, we assume a gradual improvement in the base case in the use of renewable energy, and particularly a phase down in coal, continuing trends from recent years. Our analysis also says that the economics currently are much better to convert homes and buildings with oil or propane heat to electricity. So we emphasize those in the early years and only pick up a lot more natural gas in the later years. So we are trying to very much reflect the gradual trend to clean the grid as well as for the economics to improve over time. I'd also note that from an emissions point of view, it varies from region to region. At the moment in California on the West Coast and the Northeast, yes, you will reduce emissions with electrification. In the Midwest, we're probably not quite there yet. And some of the estimates I've seen will be more, call it 2030 plus or minus before. Obviously, the equipment you install today will work after then too. But that also needs to be considered. And then I forget the second part of the question.
Well, it dealt with how do we account for kind of increasing industrial and large commercial natural gas efforts?
We definitely think that we need to use natural gas where we're using it as efficiently as possible. And so, yes, we do include a variety of efficiency measures for commercial and industrial with natural gas. I'd also note, even if we're eventually going to electrify, you really want to reduce those loads. So now we save natural gas, and that makes it easier and less expensive to electrify at some point in the future. In general, I would note that for electrification, we tend to focus on when existing equipment needs replacement. So when your air conditioner goes, that's a great time to upgrade to a heat pump as opposed to ripping out your fully functioning air conditioner and furnace. So we very much care about the timing of these in ways that will optimize the economics.
Another question, and this will be directed at Steve, but I want to hear the other speakers if they want to jump in as well. This asks, do our projected savings take into account population growth? And then the broader part of that is, how does human population growth impact our potential for emissions reduction? So I'll start with Steve there.
Yeah, so our underlying base case is based on the AEO reference case. And yes, they do assume population growth, growth in the economy, et cetera. So all of that is fully incorporated into our study. So, I mean, basically what our study says, we can get half the greenhouse gas reductions we need given those projections. Obviously, if population were to grow more slowly, we'd get additional reductions, but we didn't model those. But other people may want to add something.
Yeah, this is Kathleen. I would just say it's certainly considered in our modeling. And in fact, given the global modeling and in some areas of the world where population and economic growth really are considerable in the next 20, 30 years, the role of efficiency is even more important to make sure that we can have that just and sustainable growth with minimal impacts on energy and emissions.
Just to give one example, in the U.S., I don't remember the exact figure, but somewhere around 70% of homes roughly have air conditioning, plus or minus. That may be off by a little bit. India, it's 5%. So as India starts adding air conditioning, it's going to be vitally important that they use efficient equipment and do as much as possible to reduce the load the heat came through windows, through the walls, etc. And India, as an example, has this whole climate change cooling action plan that's designed to do that. They're very aware of the problem, but as we deal with population growth and economic growth in places like India, efficiency is going to be, I'll say, triply important.
I would just add in the topic of cooling efficiency that is an area getting increased attention, driven by both increased population, but the rise of the middle class and a greater demand for air conditioning. That's another area where companies and other institutions can make commitments. There are a number of coalitions forming around being committed to low GWP as well as high efficient air conditioning and appliances. So an area of great international interest.
And as I recall, IEA had a report in the last couple of years all about global cooling demand.
Yep, the future of cooling.
I'd like to direct this next question toward Yash. We've had a few attendees ask us about the economic costs of these EE measures, these that we're recommending, and both in the US and even worldwide. And if I recall correctly, in the NRDC report, you do talk about some costs and what are the high rate of return of some of these measures. So could you elaborate on that?
Sure. So we, in our NRDC 2017 report, and that's reiterated in many ways in ACEEE's this new report now, we found many energy efficiency measures to be among the the least expensive ways of achieving emissions reductions, which is one of the main reasons why we believed that energy efficiency could be relied upon so heavily. So just to give an example, I mean, I may not have the exact sort of numbers in my head, but roughly and directionally speaking, energy efficiency oftentimes is, at least if you think about it from a unit of energy saved, it's oftentimes between a third and maybe even 50% cheaper than the next cheapest way to achieve emissions reductions. And of course, it varies, right? I mean, if you think about LEDs, they can be really cost effective. Building insulation is another great example of inexpensive ways to reduce energy use. Among perhaps the currently more expensive approaches may be heat pumps, but the cost of heat pumps are falling rapidly. If you sort of include, for the purposes of this discussion, electric vehicles, their cost is also falling rapidly as well. So so there are lots of cost-effective energy efficiency measures. Is my main point. In terms of numbers, this report estimates the savings at about $700 billion by 2050. This is very much in line with our 2017 report as well. We saw the cost effectiveness of energy efficiency being the enabler, really, for achieving our 80% emissions reduction by 2050. So, energy efficiency is absolutely critical to cost effectively achieving our emissions goals.
Yeah, this is Kathleen. I can chime in too. Globally, I have some numbers in terms of that are very much in line with what was just mentioned. So our analysis looks at all cost-effective measures, and if all of those opportunities are taken up, that would present an opportunity for global average annual investments between now and 2025 needing to double. So I think they're at something like 230 now. Don't quote me on that. But they would, they definitely would need to double by 2025. Yeah, it's 2040. Thank you. Someone corrected me. Or 240, sorry. Anyway, they need to double between now and 2025, and then double again in 2040. So we're talking about a huge opportunity for investment that is very cost effective, like you were saying. Most of the measures are going to pay back on an average payback factor of about 3 over their life. So we like to think of that as an opportunity and not so much as a cost. And it presents, a lot of opportunity across all the sectors.
I would just add that I had mentioned the New York City building performance law. The Urban Green had done some estimates of the investment required to bring all the medium and large buildings into compliance. They're estimating the mid-range is around $20 billion of investment. That would represent a 13 times increase in the annual investment in retrofits within the New York City market. Good news is they also estimate that it would create 141,000 jobs. So this would not only provide obviously great environmental benefits, but also great economic development to the city of New York as well. So these policies have many, many benefits. The health, the wellness of the buildings, pollution, environmental aspects around emissions, as well as economic development.
Just one other quick point, Vignesh, again, and tying back to the previous question on population, I just want to also clarify that energy efficiency is among the cheapest energy solutions, not just clean energy solutions, but all energy solutions. So in other words, if you think about populations growing and people wanting more energy services, you're going to have to provide that somehow, and energy efficiency is cheaper than anything else. So cheaper than gas, cheaper than coal, cheaper than all other solutions. So it's definitely one that we should rely on first, and then look to, of course, other clean energy solutions to meet our climate goals.
Thank you. I wanted to ask, mostly focused at Clay, you talked a little bit about corporate efforts and the rising number of them. And I'm wondering, to what extent is federal U.S. inaction perhaps prompting some of this? I mean, do you see a correlation there, or is the corporate world taking more action because U.S. government is, you could say in some ways, is perhaps retrenching a bit?
Well, energy efficiency is interesting because a lot of the action actually takes place at the local level in cities. And we have seen certainly states and cities stepping up their ambition, joining the We Are Still In, making commitments and addressing issues like climate change within their own jurisdictions. So I think regulations and policies can certainly drive investment, and we're seeing it from the mayors of small towns in the Midwest all the way up to the largest cities on the coast. Our research, which we've done for a decade, cost reduction was always the #1 driver of investment. In the last 2 years, coincidentally enough, greenhouse gas reduction was named as the highest priority driver for energy efficiency and clean energy investment. So that is an interesting coincidence. We'll just leave it at that.
One attendee asked us, and I'll direct this to start with Steve, if we could talk a little bit about the role of equity-focused policies, energy efficiency policies that address energy insecurity, energy burdens in low-income communities.
Yes, our study looked at how much we can save over the whole economy, and we think it's very important to make sure that means everybody participates. So we did include lots of savings in terms of the homes and transportation of all families, not just those that are middle and upper income. And policy-wise, it's going to take somewhat different approaches. Low, moderate income people usually don't have the money to make these investments, so there's going to need to be a lot more grant funding, a lot more technical assistance, as well as, in particular for moderate, maybe some long-term financing as opposed to short-term financing. But we think it's vitally important that we consider the needs of all families and not just those with the means to buy an EV or a solar collector.
Just adding to that, I strongly agree with Steve that we need to provide different kinds of assistance especially for low and medium income families to be able to capitalize on energy efficiency improvements. it's on the flip side, it's also critical that we do so because these families typically end up spending a higher proportion of their income on energy services. So by enabling them to invest in energy efficiency, we are going to make it so much more valuable for them because, you know, it frees up some of their income for other vital needs as well.
We have at this point just time for one more question, so I'm going to make this a round robin and really kind of ask everyone to give one or two answers. As mentioned earlier, next week is Climate Week, New York, and leaders from all over the world will be gathering and we'll be talking about climate action. And I want to ask you, of the 11 opportunities in this report that we talk about, which particular opportunity or policy do you think is most likely to kind of happen in the next decade? Where will we see the most progress? I'll start with Steve.
Good question. I'm going to mention two. I think what we call smart controls, intelligent efficiency is definitely taking off. It tends to be some of the lowest cost savings. And we see that really taking off over the next decade. I'd also mention electric vehicles. Their market share is growing, many new models being introduced, and various other studies that we referenced and used are projecting, that sometime in the 2020s they'll have the same cost as internal combustion engine vehicles, and by within the next decade will probably be the majority of at least light-duty vehicle sales.
And Clay, quickly.
Yeah, so I'm going to focus more on what are considered troubled sectors, right? Sectors that are difficult to decarbonize. And the two that jump out here is historically industrial energy efficiency has been very challenging due to its use of fossil fuels. I think there'll be an increasing interest at the Climate Summit on that. And of course, the retrofitting of existing buildings is something that ACEEE has been talking about for 40 years. We will talk about it for a long time. It is a big challenge, but also a great opportunity.
And we're almost out of time, but I would just like to hear very quick responses from Vignesh and Kathleen.
Sure, I'll go, Vignesh. My choice for the ones that will see near-term progress are going to be buildings and appliances sort of together as one thing, and then electric vehicles as my second. And then just to echo Clay, though, I will say one that we should really start to focus on is the industrial sector, because it is one with huge potential, also very difficult, but also absolutely critical to get right.
Yeah, and for me, it's all of the above. But I guess if I had to pick one, I would definitely zero in on the sort of digitalization opportunities that energy efficiency is starting to play with, and whether that's smart controls in buildings or advanced manufacturing software and so on. I think we haven't quite understood all the opportunities that are out there that we still need to do some work on that, but I think that's the key area.
Well, we are now out of time. I want to thank everyone for joining today's webinar. We will send you a link of today's recording in the next day or two, and we will post the webinar and the slides on ACEEE's YouTube page. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.